the stream will get taken down in the middle. So I'm going to give it a shot. Here, let me double check one more time, make sure we're live in both windows. Looks like we are. Also, I'm not sure why, but the vertical feed, the OBS is not changing the scenes, so you're not going to see the video if you're in the vertical. Here we go. All right, so basically, I watched some of this Billy Carson appearance on Rogan, and I happen to know an awful lot about the things that he is talking about. And so, man, I would spit this Coke out if I could. Here we go. That's better. So yeah, I knew that he's full of shit about a lot of things, and I was really surprised to discover that Professor Dave often didn't know what he was talking about. And it's interesting because they're kind of almost reverse scenarios. The issues with these guys. In the case of Billy Carson, he's just making stuff up to make money, period. End of story. And you'll see that in this video. I tear him to pieces. And it's really obvious. You know, you don't really even need to be an expert or do research. A lot of it, you just have to think critically, and it just falls apart. But Dave is so stuck in his paradigm that even though the Michael Levin research, for example, is from 2013, it's not even recent. It is such a challenge to everything that Dave has been taught and the paradigm that he is a product of that I think he just blocks it out, or, you know, I don't really know exactly what goes through the minds or does not go through the minds of these muggles. So let's get into it, check it out. I'll check back in with the chat in a minute, make sure everything's kosher. Like last time I tried to do this just for my patrons, they did take it down. I could even get a copyright strike. So let's hope this goes okay. Just a week or so after the mind-bendingly dumb and insane appearance of Terrence Howard on the Joe Rogan show, he decided to double down and invite another fraudulent grifter by the name of Billy Carson to come on the show. And when I heard about that, after having done a Terrence Howard reaction debunk, I knew I had to dip my toes into the Billy Carson episode. And in this video, I'm going to debunk Billy Carson, but surprisingly, at least as much Professor Dave. Throughout the video, Professor Dave is reprimanding, ridiculing, and mocking Billy Carson, quite rightfully, for not having done research into the subjects that he's talking about. But much to my shock, Professor Dave had done at least as poor of a job. And I established beyond a shadow of a doubt that he didn't take his own advice and take even 5 minutes to Google some of these things. I mean, it is a slaughter, Professor Dave, and I hope to God you fucking see this and respond someday, because, man, would I be embarrassed if I was you. And in Professor Dave's case, it's not as overtly diabolical. It's just that there are a lot of major developments coming from the worlds of neuroscience and morphology and physics that really kind of overturn the old paradigm. And so I think he's just sort of still stuck in the parameters that were dictated to him by the cultural conventions of his paradigm, that he is not even keeping up with the most current research. So this, for me, gives me an incredible opportunity to fight back against the people that I feel are doing a tremendous disservice to any real evolution in consciousness. It is actually possible to marry science and spirituality. They should inform each other, complement each other. And to have these guys with these gigantic platforms spewing all of this ridiculous, obviously, you know, no research going into it, overt lies being told, it's just completely invalidates what is a truly important, maybe the most important understanding that we can develop in the context of a new paradigm. So let's jump right in there, shall we?
By now, most of you have seen my debunk of Terrence Howard's Joe Rogan episode. As surprising as it was to watch him babble like a lunatic and fumble second-grade math, what's even more surprising is how many delusional toddlers continue to infest the comment section, relentlessly defending Terry as a genius. It's profoundly depressing. So where do we go from here? Well, just as so many of you requested that I debunk Terry, you've also requested that I cover a similar fellow named Billy Carson, who also appeared on Rogan's show this past week.
Okay, so let me just interject just a little bit there. In case some of you guys are unfamiliar with this, Terrence Howard has been saying things like 1 × 1 = 2 and all sorts of just stupid crap that, you know, people are like, oh, he's overturning the paradigm. He said that 0 is not real and it was actually invented by the banks in order to screw us over. I hate to tell you, Terry, but 0 is a little bit older of a concept than banking. And I happen to be somewhat of an expert in the mysteries and Sir Isaac Newton. And so one of the first videos that I watched of Terrence Howard, within seconds, he just immediately lied and said that the flower of life that Isaac Newton, Da Vinci, and Pythagoras spent their entire careers obsessively trying to understand what it meant. Da Vinci was interested in it. Sir Isaac Newton, there's not one iota of evidence that he ever even saw it. Nothing in any of his papers, nothing in any of his writings. There's a reference to a tree of life that is an alchemical there's a stage in the alchemical process where the mercury and gold sort of looks like a tree, and they suspected at that point that material might be alive, so they called it the tree of life. And Pythagoras, there's a tree that was extracted from the Pythagorean theorem several thousand years after Pythagoras died. So, you know, just immediately, he's just making stuff up in order to create intrigue. Another great example I can give you is that he brought these patents up on when he was on Rogan, and every single one of them, if you actually look it up, is an abandoned patent. And he brought them up in a patent office document in such a way that suggested that all of these virtual reality companies, major corporations, were using the patents. What it actually was is an exclusionary differentiation I think that's what it's called, an exclusionary differentiation clause, or, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but it's something along those lines. The point of it is to say, not this, not this, not this. It's not this patent, it's not this patent. Okay, they weren't saying we're using these patents. They were saying we're using these patents, and these patents that are similar concepts are not the patents in question. This is part of the legal process. What's so important to understand here, you guys, is that he knew that, and he was literally lying through his teeth on one of the largest platforms on earth in order to make himself appear to be something he's not. All right, so forget about the fact that all of his ideas are just boneheaded as hell. All the stuff he says about electromagnetism, you know, it's just garbage. It's not revolutionary thinking. It's not, you know, if I spend almost all my time studying neuroscience and physics, there's all kinds of conflicting theories and ideas and stuff. But you can tell something that's coherent and has logic and some kind of substantial basis to it, compared to something that's just the ravings of an idiot that doesn't know what they're talking about. And one of the things that I think it would help people to understand is that, you know, all of these mathematics and the functions and parameters that something like electromagnetism are guided by, right, that inform their behavior, these rules and laws and ideas and concepts are ubiquitous throughout nature, right? So the fact that Terrence thinks he can challenge all of these things not only shows that he is not a genius, but it literally proves his unenlightened ignorance. Because if he actually understood nature, then he would understand that all of these things are inextricably intertwined in the fundamental fabric that underlies all of creation. So it's not just offensive to common sense and moral decency, and, you know, to also to evaluate the ego. I don't know that we have instruments capable of that, to say that I've overturned Einstein and Carl Sagan and all, all of these great minds, mathematicians, scientists. They all missed all this super obvious shit that I have managed to fix without knowing a single equation. One last point on this guy. He also said that he had the theory of everything when he was 9. And then he goes on to say he doesn't believe in gravity. Okay. So gravity is part of the theory of everything. So how did you find the theory of everything? The grand unified theory, the gut. How did you find the grand unified theory if you don't even believe in one of the constituent elements? And show me you do an equation on paper for me now that would allow you to have insights in it. You know what I mean? It's so obviously a bunch of lies and insanity that it is seriously it's stomach turning to think that there are enough people in the world that have not educated themselves enough to catch this stuff. I'm sorry if you're one of them, but get your head together, man. Oh, and now we're going on to Billy Carson, who is at least as bad. The thing is, he's not as stupid and insane, but he definitely is just constantly lying through his teeth, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. Either way, he's a grifter. He's pretending to be an expert, making millions of dollars off of people's stupidity and naivety.
Okay, so let me check in with the chat and make sure that our audio is okay and everything. Let's see. I don't see anyone saying it's not, so I'm going to assume that we're actually good. And I haven't been shut off yet, so...
Some of you may be tired of me debunking Rogan guests, and admittedly I am too. Don't worry, this isn't the new direction of the channel. But because Joe and Billy talk about Terry several times, and because of my utter disdain for all of the credulous sheep who fall for Terry's gibberish and felt the need to spew vitriol and accusations of racism at me for daring to expose his fraudulence, I'm going to rub it right in their dumb faces by debunking another one of their heroes. So who is this Billy Carson? Much like Terry, he spews ridiculously transparent falsehoods in podcasts and in the crappy books he writes. He just doesn't have the Hollywood resume that Terry does. Instead of starring in movies, he makes YouTube videos that are a mixture of Ancient Aliens-style archaeological revisionist fantasies mixed with success porn, like 10 Steps to Become a Millionaire. It's like Gaia mixed with Andrew Tate, basically an amalgam of everything that gullible people fall for. Despite having no clue what he's talking about in literally any academic subject, he speaks with confidence about any topic he wants, using buzzwords he's memorized but doesn't understand. To appear more credible, he references some certificates from MIT and Harvard, hoping that people will think he got degrees from MIT and Harvard. He didn't.
You guys already seen the similarities here? I mean, the other guy, Terrence Howard, did the exact same thing. He pulls up all of these abandoned patents that are totally useless and pretends like all these corporations are using them in order to create a sense of credibility. And the thing is, you guys, if he actually believed in himself, he wouldn't do that. There's your first clue. He knows he's full of shit.
These are just short online courses that anybody can take and mean absolutely nothing. Of course, the people who fall for his bullshit think that everyone at prestigious universities are establishment elites pushing the fake Rockefeller narrative, so applauding these non-existent credentials from these institutions is a stunning example of their own hypocrisy. But apart from pointing out that he doesn't sound as obviously insane as Terry, there's not much else to talk about here. So let's go straight to the interview. We kick things off right around the 2-minute mark with a very telling statement from Joe.
Because these subjects, so many of these subjects, so many people have like an instantaneous reaction.
Yeah.
And that instantaneous reaction is, oh, hogwash.
Yeah.
If this was true, I would already know about it. It would be taught in universities.
Yep.
It would all be...
Yes, Joe, if any of the things that your charlatan guests said were true, we would know about them. They would be taught in universities. People who work in these fields don't just arbitrarily ignore evidence. The idea that the utmost truths can only come from one unqualified jackass who has never studied any academic subject a day in his life is a pathetic fantasy enacted by lazy, uneducated people. As we go through the podcast, in the off chance that any Billy or Terry fans have the courage to be watching, and I'm not holding my breath, I want want you to see how painfully easy it is to disprove everything out of Billy's mouth.
That's true, too. And mostly I'm pausing to try to escape the algorithm. I'm pretty paranoid about getting a copyright strike. But, you know, I hope that you guys understand why I'm doing this. It is an incredible disservice to people that think outside of the box and ask questions and are fascinated with mysteries, to present things that are obviously ridiculous and foolish, and to do it on the mainstream stage where it just makes thinking outside of the box look like the, you know, territory that is completely owned and operated by idiots and, you know, credulous people. And it's also kind of predatory because people's paranoia right now, you know, feeling disenfranchised and disillusioned, and seeing all the betrayal from the machine, you know, it's very opportunistic because people are terrified of the unknown. That's why there is a mainstream matrix in the first place. You know, that's why people are so committed to their political narratives, to their religion. They're terrified of the unknown. So when people find out that everything they thought they knew was a lie, they're wide open to people like Billy Carson and Terrence Howard and Graham Hancock. You know, he's just as bad. Maybe even worse, because he tends to be really condescending to the ancient cultures that he's constantly saying, you know, they couldn't possibly have done this with sticks. And I found 2 cases so far where he says they only had sticks and rocks when they actually were cultures that had advanced metallurgy. You know, he had this bowl in some clip I saw recently, and he's like, look how smooth it is. They couldn't have done this with sticks. The culture he was talking about had machines, you know, very basic machines. But they definitely had metallurgy and were perfectly capable of shaping a stone bowl. I mean, he's so desperate that it's gotten to the point where he says things that are just obviously stupid to try to create intrigue. On the other hand, we have somebody like Professor Dave with his nose in the air. He literally, when he does these debunks, he has his nose in the air, you know, and he is so indoctrinated in his paradigm that he is not capable of thinking beyond it, you know. And so I'm trying to find a middle ground. I've had a lot of crazy experiences in my life that defy conventional explanations and scientific understanding, you know, but they don't require something outside of the laws of nature, you know, to facilitate them having happened. There are a number of potential explanations for telepathy, for example, entanglement, brain waves, you know. There's always some mechanistic basis that allows things to happen in this universe. So the real trick is to present this new paradigm in a way that does not require people to abandon reason and common sense. Because it is true that a change in the collective consciousness is the only possible remedy to all of the bullshit in the world that costs us so much human potential, that causes so much suffering, you know. And it's that middle ground between pulp fiction tabloid jackasses like Billy Carson and Professor Dave where this stuff is, you know, emerging. Let me look at the chat again to make sure that we haven't been shut down. Hey, we're still going, aren't we? Yep. All right. Maybe I'll get away with this, you guys. I hope so. And by the way, there is so much crap presented by both Billy Carson and Professor Dave that this is an hour, I think, and like 20 minutes or something. And I'm not even halfway through it. I don't think. There's going to be like 2 or 3 parts to this.
Except that what he just said isn't totally fair. I think over and over again throughout the history of academia.
Okay, in case I broke up our conceptual continuity here. What Dave said is that if these things were true, they would be taught in major universities. That's dumb. We all know that's dumb.
We have definitely seen a tendency for the parameters imposed on people by the discipline of science and the philosophies of science in the ultra-materialistic modern paradigm definitely create blind spots. And a lot of those blind spots are starting to be filled in, and they imply that people like Professor Dave have believed a lot of things absolutely, scoffed, since I was a child, going around saying, don't you guys think Lamarck was probably at least partially correct? Oh, you're an idiot, you just don't understand evolution, you know what I mean? And now, of course, we have all these leading minds that are going, well, maybe even Lamarck was right. We have the truth that neurons are not responsible for cognition, or at least they're not necessary for cognition. We have single-celled organisms outperforming humans with computers. So, I think Dave's assumption that if any of this stuff was true, it would be taught in universities is kind of stupid, really. I mean, it's fucking stupid. Almost as bad as Billy Carson and Terrence Howard. However, at the same time, people are sort of overreacting. The pendulum swings, right? It's like it went this way with religion, and everybody got burned at the stake, and gay people got murdered, and all that sort of thing. And then people went, okay, well, we want none of that, and so they swung all the way to the other direction, all the way in the other direction in favor of materialism and atheism and all of this sort of stuff. And that created a whole different set of problems, a complete and total crisis of purpose. And also, I think, the blind spots that I referenced, where they were missing all these obvious aspects of the reality that we inhabit. And it just so happens that those blind spots landed in places that caused a tremendous disconnect that has been extremely damaging to humanity and to the planet. So, hope you see this, Professor Dave, because you're really part of the problem, bud.
Here's Joe setting Billy up to spew some garbage about the Sumerians.
Like, why would they detail this, and how do they have a representation of the solar system with the correct amount of planets and relatively the correct order and size? It's not exact, but it's an artistic version of the real thing. Like, what's the conventional explanations when people tried to dismiss what they knew in ancient Sumer?
Well, the conventional explanation is always going to the term mythology. They throw mythology around, left and right to cover up the fact that they have no clue or idea. So they turn it into mythology so they can kind of say it's all fantasy and fairy tales, and this is how they express themselves or how they understood the universe.
In fact, just about an hour ago, I was doing a secret stream for my patrons, which you should probably become if you're interested in the mysteries or consciousness, ritual, magic, shamanism. You get access to 6 years now of premium material. At least please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and there are options to support the channel. In the chat, we are demonetized and we get no support from Babylon. So if you appreciate me being here, act like it. Don't be one of them people that you just talk a lot, you ain't finna do nothing. I don't know if you guys will get that reference. There's this terrible mumble rap song that's gone viral that I might talk a little bit about later. But, damn, what was I about to interject here? It was pretty important. Oh, well, let's just keep going.
It's all mythology. It's all fake.
Oh, yeah. So in the secret stream today, we're reading from a book by a 33rd degree Freemason named Albert Pike. And he's talking about how in the original mystery traditions that Christianity and Islam and these other religions grew out of, the initiates knew that these things were allegories. They were never meant to be taken literally. And one of the great evils that was perpetrated on people is that they were convinced to start taking these myths literally. And so Billy Carson here is doing evil, basically. he's also doing a disservice to our ancestors, the ancient people that knew these things were allegories. They were never meant to be taken literally or thought to be real. And in that book, Albert Pike says that for the initiates, it was known that hell is an allegory, that, you know, all these beings were archetypes and allegorical archetypes. And to the profane, they were taken to be real. The ignorant, they were taken to be real. So, thanks, Billy, for trying to set us back a couple thousand years.
But in reality, it's not all fake.
Yes, it is all fake. It is all mythology. That's what religions do. They write myths. All of them. They all borrow each other's myths and tell the same stories over and over again about gods who create things, and floods, and wars. They just change the names. It's what humans do. We look up at the stars and make up stories, especially in the times when we didn't know what stars are. But everyone wants the movie Stargate to be real, so let's hear Billy spin his wheels about Sumerian cuneiform.
So this text literally, some of the letters actually relate to complete ideas.
Okay, so before we let him get into that, the Sumerians and whatnot, they did have some kind of accurate information that may have been off limits at the time or inaccessible. Dave did not address that. Did you notice that? He just is like, well, yeah, they are full of shit and they make up myths and stuff, but no attempt at explaining the unexplainable. And I should mention also that the Dogon tribe of Africa had star charts that Hubble discovered 15 years ago or so. And they've had those since the 1950s. And they
Actually, more accurately, they had maps of Sirius. And it's not that they had them since the 1950s. Anthropologists showed up and found out about them in the 1950s. And what's interesting about it, and I'm going to get to this in the video, so I won't go too deep into it now. I actually received information during an ayahuasca ceremony that involved the astrophysics of why the third body in the Sirius system didn't become a red dwarf. And the Dogon knew that as well, way back in the day. They didn't have the astrophysics that I received from ayahuasca, and it actually wasn't confirmed until 10 days after the ceremony. So when I received this information, literally nobody knew it. And I've done a lot of research into this, and the Sirius mystery is a wild thing. It pops up all over the planet, and there is a theory. I don't think it's a theory. I think it's something we've known since the Incas, at least. But our consciousness emanates from the sun. And the Sirius A is, I can't remember how many times bigger than the sun, but it's almost like Earth to the sun ratio. And it's 4,000 times as hot. So if there's a connection between consciousness and electromagnetic points of density, which is basically what this would be about, that would explain why this occult knowledge is being transmitted to the Hopi and the Freemasons and the Sequoia in the Amazon and me, yeah. And I'll get more into that in upcoming videos and live streams. While I'm thinking about it, actually, there is an incredible opportunity coming up on November 1st. A massive coronal injection is into our electromagnetic field. A coronal ejection is going to contact the Earth on November 1st. So if you're one of those people that thinks that, who's that morphological field guy? Sheldrake and me and the Incas and, all these other folks are correct about the solar storm periods being an opportunity for us to interface with this higher consciousness, with the collective mind. Take some San Pedro on November 1st, get up at high altitude, and do some meditating. You may be surprised what happens.
claim to have received them from aliens from Sirius, along with marijuana, which is actually the most sophisticated plant on Earth biologically. And on top of that, the Hopi also have a blue star prophecy. The Freemasons have a blue star that represents Sirius in their lodge. Both the Hopi and the Freemasons have a secret handshake that identifies other keepers of his knowledge, which is presumably from Sirius. I received astrophysical information about another star system while on ayahuasca one time that was confirmed 10 days later when the research paper was printed, 10 days after the ceremony. And then I found out that one of the nearby tribes in Ecuador also claims to communicate with beings from Sirius when they drink ayahuasca.
What I'm getting at here is that the Sirius mystery is only one of hundreds, if not thousands, of ancient mysteries that we don't really have good explanations for, such as the Nazca lines and the pyramids, and a great many others. Professor Dave's attitude towards this stuff doesn't really represent a scientific mindset. It just represents bias.
So, obviously Professor Dave's dismissive attitude, without even really trying to totally debunk these things, is a bit lame, But then again, so is Billy Carson. Let's see why.
But it's incredible work, and it takes a long time to do. And then you have to let this thing dry, and then it becomes stone. So, if people were supposed to be trying to worry about how they're going to get their next meal, shelter for the night, and all these kind of things, who has time to sit down and write these incredible works of art like the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example?
What? Where they're going to get shelter for the night? He's talking about Sumerians and pretending they were hunter-gatherers. Sumerians lived in giant cities. Ur, Lagash, Kish, Uruk. These cities had huge palaces and defensive walls. They housed tens of thousands of people. Why the hell would the scribes who were writing cuneiform need to look for a meal or a place to sleep? They're scribes. That is literally their only job. They lived in palaces or temples. This idiot has no clue what Sumer was. Nobody should be listening to this podcast episode even 1 second past this very first moronic statement.
Facts.
And yet we persist.
So I think they really were writing down, and also they were transcribing information that was given to them by these quote-unquote gods with a lowercase g.
Right, they were taking dictation from gods, because Billy says so. That's not at all an extraordinary statement, so it requires no evidence whatsoever. The Epic of Gilgamesh was dictation from gods, a very obvious myth about kings and heroes and adventures, just like any other myth from any other civilization, which holds no transcendent or relevant information about anything.
And something that I didn't...
Just a second, guys. I gotta keep checking with the chat, make sure we're still. Yep, looks like we are still. Uh-oh. Are we good? Yeah, we're good. Okay. Can I explain the claim about cannabis being more advanced than other plants? Biologically, it's more sophisticated. It's easy to just Google a sentence and get a bunch of information, but the way that it produces chemicals, the structure of it, and some aspects of its, like, I don't know what to call it, photosynthetic, I can't remember the word, photoreactive maybe? I don't know. But yeah, Google that sentence, and somebody better qualified to go into detail about it can explain it to you. I think my source for that was the Cannabis Growers Bible by Ed Rosenthal, I think. I might have the author wrong, but the Cannabis Growers Bible.
Mentioned earlier when he was talking about the myths, I've long been of the opinion that these ancient civilizations did not mean these things to be taken literally. They knew what the allegories were. I don't want to ruin it, but one of the next incredibly stupid things that Carson says, for example, has to do with gold and the sun. And it's very, very clear that the Egyptians and the Aztecs and the Incas and all of the rest of them, Babylonians and all of these other cultures that revered gold for spiritual and not for monetary reasons, they all understood allegory. So, I think he really does have a point here, and I think that one of the major malfunctions of the entire modern period, going all the way back 2,000 years to the beginning of Christianity, was that people started taking it literally. Jesus is obviously a solar myth. Sun dies and is resurrected every day. It spends 3 days crossing the Southern Cross constellation, 3 days on the cross, stops moving for 3 days in December, and then starts moving again the 3 days in the tomb. Light walks on water, reflects on water as Jesus does. He literally even said, "I am the light of the world," and people are still like somehow not quite following the plot here. So, I think that disconnect with reality and nature and depth and that's what spirituality is. That's what it's supposed to be, is a deeper understanding of the allegory and the wiring under the board that reveals the interconnectivity of the universe to us. These myths are just a way of preserving and making that entertaining.
By the way, something I missed. I mentioned how all of these different cultures understood that gold came from stars, and they saw it as crystallized consciousness or something similar. I failed to mention that also most North American indigenous cultures did as well. I always thought that they just didn't value it, but that's not exactly right. They did consider it sweat eventi, as the Incas did.
To learn about.
Has to be dictation from gods, because reasons.
So when you're reading things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, for people who don't know, is one of the oldest versions of a lot of the stories that you hear in the Bible. Very similar to them. There always seems to be a great flood. There's a few heroes. There's angry gods. There's a bunch of stuff going on.
Joe said something smart. Ancient Mesopotamian myths were recycled to develop Hebrew mythology, something most Christians don't know and don't want to know. But more importantly, he just totally dismantled the dumb thing that Billy said, and neither of them pick up on it.
Like cuneiform. Can you read that? Do you know how to read it?
Yeah, a small amount of it, yeah. Studying it from books that I had bought right off of Amazon. I was able to take stone tablets and decipher them myself. So anyone can go online to the UCLA CDLI online cuneiform digital library and read these stone tablets for themselves. You don't need Zacharias Hitchen. You don't need anyone else.
Yes, Billy pretends he can read Sumerian cuneiform. Of course, he never demonstrates this ability. Just trust him.
Is there controversy as far as, like, are there different versions of the transcription? Like, do some people think it's interpreted differently? Is, like, some debate about that?
Only where it comes to where some of the text is missing.
Billy is admitting that there is no controversy over what the intact tablets say, yet he often pretends to have alternate interpretations about what they say.
Like, when you look at that language, we don't even know what it sounds like, right?
Right, no, and the language popped up out of nowhere.
First, it's important to note that cuneiform is not a language, it's a script. But also, if we have no idea what it sounded like, then how do we know what it sounded like?
Mesilim, lukal kishke, inim ishtara na tha, eshkana pera kipana piru.
And then a vertical in the middle. So we can read this, Ku, Ra, Ash, the name of Cyrus.
Obviously, there is some uncertainty here. All of our information about this pronunciation comes from Akkadian society a few centuries later, but they don't even bother engaging with what we know and just pretend it doesn't exist. Or they just have no idea because they've never taken 10 seconds to check. Then Billy says it popped up out of nowhere. What does that even mean? That it began at some point, like literally everything else in human history?
Just imagine, like, a human being deciding that they were going to write down in these very bizarre, and they all agreed that all these things mean a certain thing. So they had to somehow or another have a Rosetta Stone or something where they're documenting it so that people can learn it.
Jesus Christ, Joe. Really?
teach it?
Yes, Joe, that's how symbols work. Have you seen Morse code? People made up symbols with dots and dashes, and all agreed on what letters they represented. I fail to see what is so amazing about this, other than that it is very old, and we get to see it, which is very neat, but it doesn't mean it came from gods.
There's a lot of weirdness in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't read it, but is there any references to anything that's similar, like Anunnaki type characters, the Nephilim, or anything like that in the Dead Sea Scrolls?
They show up everywhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Enuma Elish, and the Epic of Atrahasis. Of course, even in the Bible, they're known as the Anak, A-N-A-K. We were grasshoppers in their eyesight, it says in the biblical text.
Okay, we've already established that Hebrew mythology stole from earlier mythology, yet we are supposed to somehow be surprised that the same characters show up, like these giants, and we are also supposed to conclude that it's so impossible that they're just made up, even though there is no physical evidence of any giants anywhere in the ark.
Okay, so this is really important. It's a really valid point. People are always shocked that I don't believe in the Anunnaki. Of course, anything's possible, I guess. I mean, it's highly unlikely because there is not any sufficient evidence for this. There's all kinds of fake pictures, and I think you can even go to, like, in the Philippines, like, fake bones that, you know, they've all been debunked, man. And they've all been debunked, at least in part, by people that wanted to believe in it. So, you know, I think when people are like, oh yeah, they're mentioned in the Bible and in these old Syrian texts, and it's the same part of the world, more or less. You know, these massive empires traveled. They have to in order to, you know, have enough trade and resources in order to build an empire like this. So, you know, I think a lot of people really just kind of go off the deep end with this stuff because there's really nothing significant about there being both giants in, or giants in both Babylonian and, you know, Hebrew mythologies.
So, along these lines, something else that's pretty interesting. In the Babylonian lore, there was sin and, what was it? Sin and, it's escaping me, but basically, sin gave birth to the sun, which is Helios, which is where hell comes from. Hell is begat of sin. You know, you can see the lineage of these stories, which proves that it's not significant that there are similarities. It's that simple, you know. The other caveat I should add is that here in the Sacred Valley, at the Huaca Stone sites, most of them have what appears to be a throne for a like 20-foot tall person. And they all have a hole in the middle of the seat. Doesn't mean it was a throne for a 20-foot person, but it is weird. And there are accounts from the 15th century or from the 1500s of explorers claiming to have seen giants in this area. So it's not true that there's not any anecdotal evidence, but still. You know, this whole Anunnaki thing, the Bible, Babylonia, there's a clear influence that's undeniable. So,
Possible that they're just made up, even though there is no physical evidence of any giants anywhere in the archaeological or anthropological record. Also, wizards must be real because Harry Potter books exist. This is the toddler logic they are enacting here. Humans make up stories. It's a thing we do.
So no matter where you go in any culture, you're going to discover that these beings, in some way, shape, or form, engaged mankind, brought knowledge, teaching, building techniques, and just so much more wisdom and information, esoteric wisdom, alchemy. All these things came from these people.
So these giant god people came and gave us alchemy, a pseudoscience, and explained how to stack rocks real high. No skyscrapers, no airplanes, no internet, and no understanding of real science like physics or chemistry.
Okay, well, that, again, Professor Dave, is absolute bullshit. Of course, it is a totally valid criticism to say just that we are not in need of esoteric knowledge from aliens or giants. Any person of reasonable intelligence can procure whatever esoteric knowledge they need by direct observation of nature in a single lifetime. His criticism of alchemy is one of the most boneheaded dipshit things I've ever heard in my life. First of all, Newton discovered that light could refract, and many of his other discoveries, from studying alchemy, because in alchemy he learned that you could break large things down into much smaller constituents. He applied that to light. And also, although this is not necessarily absolute evidence of anything, Mercury, the planet, and the sun, which is the symbol of gold, which is the philosopher's stone, is the alchemical gold, right? The Mercury is in very close proximity. It's the closest planet to the sun. Turns out if you take elemental mercury, knock a proton off of it using a charge of electricity, it becomes gold.
Tokyo Imperial University, March 1924. In an early experiment with nuclear energy, Professor Hantaro Nagaoka directs 150,000 volts of electricity at a mercury isotope under a dielectric layer of paraffin oil for 4 hours. The purpose? To strike out a hydrogen proton from the nucleus of the mercury and produce a new element. Gold.
And I'm going to pause this real quick because I don't want to get in trouble. Are we still? Yep, we're still live. Checking in with the chat. No, man, it wouldn't be wrong of you to start a GoFundMe to do anything. You know, if you want to do something, find a way to do it. The one caveat I would offer is I don't know that becoming a shaman is really in the cards for just anyone. And I think also in the modern context, you know, if you're talking about trying to help people heal, you also need to study psychotherapy, different schools of psychology, you know, a whole lot of stuff. Just learning the archaic techniques of shamanism, I don't think is really appropriate for practitioners in the modern era. By the way, we still have a couple spots for Manu in the Amazon in May, and November and December are still open for events. Shoot me an email if you're interested.
The experiment is a success. Professor Nagaoka has solved a mystery that has eluded scientists for centuries. The mystery of the Philosopher's Stone.
The Philosopher's Stone was an idea that you could have a magic kind of material that would turn lead or some very inexpensive metal into gold. The thought that one could do that is attractive in and of itself.
For thousands of years, kings sought out this mythical device, one that could create gold out of common metal. Scientists and alchemists spent centuries trying to invent one. Even Sir Isaac Newton obsessed over the mystery of the Philosopher's Stone in the 17th century. Although the English crown, fearing the potential devaluation of gold, had made the practice of alchemy punishable by death.
And I don't know if I mentioned this, I don't think I did, but I've always found it interesting that the Templars, who were alchemists, managed to go from having no money to having the entire, you know, all the crowned heads of Europe in debt to them. Almost as if they really could make gold. Also, in Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, he actually describes the process and says it's not really lead into gold. Lead is part of the process, but it's mercury, and you apply an electrical shock to transmute it to gold, and that's exactly what they are doing in the laboratories today. So the evidence that alchemy was real is pretty, it's not proved, but it's circumstantial evidence is pretty strong.
By the time of Professor Nagaoka's experiment in 1924, most of the scientific community had declared the process of producing gold from another metal impossible. But that quickly changed once they knew where to look. The secret of alchemy lies in the stars.
When you think about how gold's made, naturally, gold is formed basically in the nuclear reactions in the sun. And then it's spread throughout the universe when a supernova occurs, and the sun explodes and sends all of the products out. Because we now can do controlled nuclear reactions, we have the ability finally to essentially manufacture gold from other elements.
Here at the University of California, Irvine.
So what was that about pseudoscience, Professor Dave?
Dr. A.J. Shaka conducts experiments in alchemy nearly every day.
We could put mercury into one of these tubes, and mercury has a minor isotope of 0.15%, mercury 196 it's called, and that isotope will actually pick up a neutron and in about 23 hours turn into gold.
To bring the reactor to full capacity, Dr. Shaka removes the control rods that absorb neutrons and keep them from reacting with other atoms. This generates power at a staggering rate.
So, just to avoid, issues, and in case I didn't explain this super well in the beginning, the point I was making about Mercury, the planet, being so close to the sun, which is a symbol of gold, quicksilver, gold, the closest element to gold, or there's one on the other side too, but, knock a proton off, Mercury becomes gold. There's a lot of other weird stuff about Mercury. For example, the metal was poured around the sarcophagi in both Mexico, it's not the Aztecs, but an offshoot, and in Egypt, with the purpose of helping to transport the soul of the deceased to the other world. Mercury, the Greek Mercury, was a psychopomp that helped people to make it to the spirit world. So, it sort of, I think, is a clue or a great illustration of the universal mind, and the way that these physical elements and the processes associated with them are sort of, it's hard to explain that Mercury, the psychopomp, is not the metal. And those other cultures didn't call the metal mercury. And yet, there's this association with the name or the metal, It's a very strange thing, and I don't think that it's coincidence. In fact, one of the ways to understand it, I think, is the higher orders of symmetry that Jung invoked to explain synchronicity. It's the same sort of thing. And Albert Pike, again, in his book, Morals and Dogma, he says the true scripture is writ large upon the land for those who have eyes to see it. And I think these sort of signs, symbols, hints, and clues that are written on the wall, are kind of, that's what he's talking about. You learn to read the book of nature, the allegories of nature. That's what the mystery traditions really were about. It was not about teaching a doctrine. It was about teaching people to see with the eyes of a shaman or a magician or an initiate.
In terms of the amount of power, including electrical energy, that you can generate from a given mass of material, nuclear is about 10 to 20 million times better than anything else.
After 24 hours, the experiment has been a success and yields gold. A real-life philosopher's stone.
There it is.
At work in the basement of a university building. The discovery of alchemy has been invaluable to science, but ironically, it has not produced untold riches.
If you irradiate for about a day in our reactor, you make 0.3 of a cent worth of gold. Since we charge $200 an hour to operate the reactor, you're pretty far in the hole.
And there was no one that named those planets that, as far as I know, could have been aware of that. And so this kind of thing sort of supports the idea of a universal mind that is integrated into the fundamental fabric of reality in just exactly the way that the alchemist said. On top of that, as a child, I was taught in school that you could not transmute elements. You could not turn lead into gold. When in fact, even though it costs like $126 trillion to make an ounce of gold with this method by our current technological standards, you can in fact do it. He does exactly the thing that Carson and Terrence Howard do to his sciences, to all of these other subjects. And it's funny because he's not wrong about these two individuals, but more often than not, when he opens his mouth, he doesn't really know what he's saying, which is pretty incredible to me. And you might say, well, these aren't his specific areas of expertise, so of course that makes sense. No, guys. This is going to apply just as much to science before this video is over.
Chemistry or biology. They sound like really crappy gods to me.
The craziest version of this story is that they genetically engineered us out of lower primates and put us here to mine gold.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then established different types of civilizations and taught us how to build things, taught us all these different things. And enough time has passed that we've kind of forgotten. Mm-hmm. Enough time has passed. That's the wackiest version of it, right?
Right.
Yes, that is pretty wacky, Joe, especially because what could that possibly mean? Genetically engineered who and from what? Which lower primates? Sahelanthropus judensis, Ardipithecus, Australopithecines, any number of Homo species? Where on this flawless gradient of evolution did this profound genetic engineering take place? And why was it needed when these species are also remarkably similar anyway? Did they also engineer Neanderthals and Denisovans? If so, what happened to them? If not, why couldn't they make us any better than other species that were also around? This story only works on people who think that anthropology suggests that a chimpanzee gave birth to a human. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. This fascination with gold is really weird.
Not only that, but people that believe this theory of alien intervention, I mean, you guys, it's just incredible to me that people just don't think just like one or two steps beyond the premise, right? There were humans all over this planet. So if there had been engineering, there would have had to have been engineering in every continent, every planet. You know how fucking big the planet is?
I should have said Neanderthals or something. I think human specifically refers to the current incarnation of people. It doesn't make any sense, you know? People, it blows my mind that ideas like this can get so hugely popular. What, people think there was like 18 people on the planet at the time or something? But now we're about to get into one of the absolute dumbest parts of this entire video, and Professor Dave and Carson are equally bad.
Yeah. This fascination with gold is really weird. Mm-hmm. Like, why back when it was basically useless? You couldn't make a knife out of it. Right. You couldn't, like it didn't make sense that this would be so valuable. Just because it's rare, you're barely alive.
Useful properties of gold. It's quite chemically inert, so it doesn't tarnish or rust, and it's non-toxic. It's malleable, so it's great for making coins and jewelry. It has a unique luster that is visually appealing. And yes, because it's rare. Come on, guys.
They were like the construction workers, and Anu and Enki and Enlil, these leader gods, were like, the foremen, the master architects and so forth, right? The boss. So these people were working, but they weren't supposed to be enslaved. They were volunteers.
Okay, so before this guy gets on with his bullshit comic book bullshit, let's talk about gold for a second, because what Dave just said is, valid, but it's not, gold was revered all around the planet for the same reason that the alchemical gold symbolizes the philosopher's stone, right? Because the ancients knew, whether you're talking about the alchemists or the Incas or the Aztecs, the Egyptians, Babylonians, they knew that consciousness comes from light, right? But it does get weirder than that. If you consider,
I should have elucidated that, and gold comes from stars, but
that they believe that most of the gold in the universe came from neutrino stars.
What's been discovered is the merger of two dense neutron stars. What they produced was a ripple in space-time that was detected as gravitational waves, as well as the light from the radioactive debris ejected from it that glows brightly for some period of weeks. And in that radioactive debris, we see signals of formation of many of the heavy elements around us, all of the gold and platinum and other precious metals. From that, we conclude that basically there's enough material produced in these events to basically seed the entire galaxy and the Earth with all these heavy metals that we find around us. What we see from the observations is a point of light, but there's a lot of information in that light. Its exact spectrum of colors across the rainbow, its brightness, and how it evolves over time. But you can distinguish whether you're seeing the heaviest elements or lighter elements based upon their color. The lighter stuff looks blue, the heavier stuff looks red. By comparing those to the theoretical predictions, we're actually able to infer what the material was made of, how much it produced, and how fast it was actually ejected from the neutron star merger.
Pause for the algo. Check in with the chat. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. No, you didn't miss me talking about crypto. We'll probably do that tomorrow. All right, we're still live, so let's get back into it. Really? One viewer? That can't be right. Uh-oh. They took me down? No. Okay. Or did they? No. All right. This is going to get crazy interesting when we get into Michael Levin, too, so stick around.
These events produced large amounts of gold, maybe hundreds of Earth masses worth of gold, and even more platinum, maybe 500 Earth masses worth of platinum.
So every single one of the cultures that I mentioned associated gold with stars. Now, you could say it's just the color. I just think that Dave is falling a little bit short in his scientific analysis of the universe and its constituent elements here. The Incas, the Aztecs, they surrounded themselves with gold all the time for spiritual reasons. The Inca called it the sweat of Enki, the sun god, the essence of the sun god. There's also evidence that I personally have uncovered that they understood the electromagnetic field and its relationship to light. Because when I visited the Temple of the Sun, I was shown these stones by this shaman who explained to me that the magnetic properties in them allowed them to concentrate the energy or the essence of Inti, the sun. That would be the electromagnetic field. So, long story short here, the fact that Billy Carson either doesn't know any of that when he's asked why did the ancients revere gold, or So he either has never bothered to research it at all whatsoever, or he's pretending like he doesn't know it so he can sell books about this stupid-ass Annunaki theory.
So, I can't believe I missed this, but those stones are alleged to be meteorites. And meteorites do have the capacity to alter electromagnetic fields and even some types to generate their own. So, the Inca had two varieties that they used. One of them is a very rust-colored iron meteorite, and they would shape them into balls, and the other is like a black, more common type of meteorite, and the iron one is female, and the darker one is male, and people refute that they're actually meteorites, and they say they come from these lodestones. But first of all, how would the Inca and the Quechua have this lore about them being meteorites? Why would they know what meteorites are, even, unless they had seen them land and then they went to get them? So I also found some of the lodestones, and magnets do stick to these relics, these ceremonial meteorites. They do not stick to the lodestones. So pretty wild.
They got tired of doing the work, according to them, for about 250,000 years of labor on Earth, and also, according to them, on Mars. This is in the text. They call it.
Okay, so 250,000 years mining gold on Earth. Have you seen how much damage, even in the United States, in the gold rush, in Colorado? That was not even the intense period, but it started 150 years ago. There would be so much evidence left over from 250,000 years of gold mining. It's so dumb that it flabbergasts me that this guy would actually say this, expecting to be taken seriously. And I'm really suspicious of Rogan at this point, because he used to call people out. He used to say, wait, what? That's dumb. He doesn't do that anymore.
But Lamu.
I can't believe we have to talk about this. People working in this capacity for 250,000 years on Earth? Where is the evidence for that? Huge structures on Mars? Where is the evidence for that? And it's in the text. Where? Which text? What's the precise translation? Lamu? Why is there no reference whatsoever that agrees with this translation? I think you can see where the rest of this episode is going to go.
So they went to meet them in the Epic of Atrahasis. They go to Adam's calendar. They go to that same structure that was discovered where that gold mine is located. I was like, holy crap, there is some link here to gold. Specifically, exactly, I don't know. But I know if you're an advanced civilization, you need gold.
Why?
For what, really?
Why does an advanced civilization need gold? We're an advanced civilization. We don't need gold. What a profoundly stupid sentence. He's pretending that highly advanced aliens who have mastered interstellar travel need some random element that can be found all over the universe and need us to mine it for them.
Okay, so now let's talk about how stupid it is to say that these aliens need us to mine gold for them. For one thing, if you were flying here from pretty much anywhere in even our own solar system, there are an abundance of asteroids that you could easily land a ship on and mine gold that are infinitely closer to everywhere else in the solar system or in the universe. They would be passing by all sorts of infinitely better sources of gold in order to come here and do it because they need slaves. I guess technologically advanced people wouldn't use machines as we would. We have been able to transmute lead into gold in a laboratory for 15, 20 years now.
It's actually more like 35.
We are not capable of interstellar travel. However, we can make gold right here on Earth. If their technology was that much more advanced than ours, I would assume they could have improved that technology and make the gold much more cost effective. Maybe they don't even have that kind of economic system, but efficient. They would not need to come here. They could make gold at home. If we can do it, more advanced aliens, and more advanced to the point where they are capable of interstellar travel, could do it without leaving their fucking couch. Shut up, people. Not to mention, gold is like the heaviest element. So they're going to load their spaceships up and fly it to another star system with their fucking asses dragging on the ground. Like, the whole gold interstellar thing is completely fucking retarded. Like, beyond belief.
It's as dumb as the plot of the movie Independence Day, where aliens need to kill us to take our planet's resources, presumably water and coal. A super cool movie, but like most science fiction, the plot does not stand up to any real scrutiny.
And then Enki says, I have an idea that will stop this war. There's an existing being on this planet. Existing, not something that doesn't exist, existing. We can add our essence to it with a slain god. So they're talking about taking the DNA or genetics from one of themselves and mixing it with the DNA of the hominid that was here. It's not specified whether it was, an ape man or anything, but they don't specify in the tablets. But to create a worker being. And they began to do this genetic modification, probably disconnecting some of our DNA, making genetic modifications to us.
So the pyramids are one of these great mysteries that I'm sure Billy Carson has all kinds of dumbass ideas about. But I had a vision many years ago, which, that doesn't mean that it has weight for me, just for the record, but I had a vision many years ago that there was electromagnetic energy shooting out of the capstone, and it was sort of integrating into the field around the planet. And it was being used to manipulate the organisms or the consciousness, not really sure, either or, all at once, all around the whole entire globe, right? So a few years ago, I just happened to be scrolling and I found a video where they were talking about how the staircases around the king's chamber in the center of the pyramid were...
Yeah, I misspoke there. It's the Temple of Hathor, where the stairs are melted, and the second pyramid, where there's melted granite around the capstone. But something else I don't think I mentioned, later we're going to get to Michael Levin's work on the electromagnetic field of organisms. And so this possibility that there was some sort of manipulation via electromagnetic energy from the pyramids is actually consistent, or at least proven plausible, by Michael Levin's research, as we shall see in a bit.
Melted.
One of the things you will notice at the second pyramid, if you spend enough time around it, especially if you spend time with someone like Yusuf, is there appears to be molten or hardened molten granite in channels throughout the causeway leading down from the second pyramid towards the back of the Sphinx. And it's granite. The edge of the limestone is clearly burned.
Another thing I don't think I mentioned is that there have been scientists that have looked at this and they said, particularly about the staircases, the only things that could have done it are electromagnetic energy or a nuclear blast.
In a lot of the places, and it's quite substantial. There's a lot of it, and it runs quite a long distance down from the pyramid. So you can follow this around, and you just keep finding more of it. As well as camel dung. Anyway, you can see the path of it comes right down the causeway, pretty much from the second pyramid. Let's look at this rock. This is a limestone block that appears to have molten granite through a channel in it, and as Yusuf's pointing out there, this stone is so many different colors, it looks like it's really been subjected to a pretty heavy heat event. But that is definitely molten granite inside a channel in a limestone block. A little further over, there's this area which is really charred. Some of that is granite, and some of that is limestone. It's just burned. Over history, when does this happen? I don't know. But I found the channels of molten granite really interesting.
They're melted, and it looks like wax, like candle wax running down the staircases. And the scientists said there's only two possible things that could have done this: a really intense charge of electromagnetic energy or nuclear energy. So, Billy, if there was manipulation of a human genome on this planet, that's how it happened. They did not go around and alter the genetics of every single organism, every single human organism on the entire planet. It's just such, you got to think like more than one step in order to kind of...
Also, to add some clarity to this, manipulation of morphology is not going to be that drastic. It's not going to cause a massive leap from Neanderthal to Homo sapien. Michael Levin will explain in more detail the kind of changes that are possible, but that's something I didn't clarify.
Get through this stuff.
Again, what is the result of this? In that timeline of hominin evolution, what is the huge jump in this smooth spectrum that produces some hyper-advanced human-god hybrid that totally defies evolutionary principles? I'm not seeing it. And the new species worked really hard, but the previous ones didn't? If they were so lazy, how had they been surviving all these millions of years? And it's funny to listen to them pretend to know how genetic modification would work. Let's hear more of that.
To get us to take orders from them, they inserted something called a worship gene, which was just discovered recently, that human beings have a gene inside of them that can be turned on and turned off. It can be turned off in a laboratory setting. It can also be turned off with a magnetic field around your head. And when it's off, you don't want to worship anything outside of yourself. You look inside, and when it's on, you look to get something from the outside. So this is incredible.
Yes, it is incredible that anyone would say the insanely dumb thing you just said. No, there is no worship gene. Complex human behaviors can't be correlated with a single gene.
Oh, really? Really, Dave? Alrighty, so the God gene on Wikipedia. How many times has he said, why don't you guys just Google shit and, not run your mouths if you don't, why y'all finna act like if you don't be knowing? The God gene hypothesis proposes that human spirituality is influenced by heredity and that a specific gene called vesicular monoamine transporter DOS predisposes humans towards spiritual and mystic experiences. The idea has been proposed by geneticist Dean Hammer in a 2004 book called The God Gene, and I don't think we really need to go through and read all of this, but it's not quite exactly as Carson describes it, but it does exist, and it is really only theoretical, but it sure doesn't sound like Dave knows about it.
Would mean that a single protein would be responsible for the behavior of worship. No, genes can't be turned arbitrarily on or off in a laboratory setting. Regulation of gene expression is a complex biochemical process that occurs within each individual cell. And to pretend that this could be controlled by an external magnetic field is even dumber. How does a
Oh, really, Dave?
magnetic field coordinate the precise behavior of dozens of enzymes?
Do you guys want to know?
In my hand, I am holding a fascinating paper from 2011 entitled DNA as a Fractal Antenna in Electromagnetic Fields. It is by Martin Blank and Reba Goodman. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty details of this paper, first of all, let's think about the title. I mean, we all know what DNA is, right? Electromagnetic fields, that's pretty self-explanatory. But what the heck is a fractal antenna? Just for our purposes, we'll keep the explanation very simple, and you just have to understand that fractal antennas are designed as essentially broadband antennas. They are capable of effectively receiving a broad band of frequencies.
Check in with the chat. Somebody asking if I believe in evolution. It doesn't require my belief. I think that the idea that Darwinian, neo-Darwinian evolution explains everything is obviously insane. And there are a growing number of, evolutionary biologists and whatever that agree. But it is part of the story. It's not entirely wrong. It's just not the whole story.
DNA is apparently stored compacted inside each one of our cells. And that compacted ball, which is known as a fractal globule, has some interesting characteristics. Apparently, if you pull on any part of what looks like this knotted ball of yarn, it will actually effortlessly uncoil, and it is not tangled or knotted in any way, even though it appears to be. This makes sense because if your DNA needs to unwind and all the crazy biology stuff and chemistry stuff has to happen, if it's knotted in a big tangled ball, that's not going to work. So this fractal globule is the way that DNA orders itself to save space and efficiently do other crazy things in each one of your cells. And they call it a fractal globule because it's apparently fractal. Okay, so now you're thinking, well, right, but you said a fractal antenna, and you said normal antennas are conductive metal, so electricity passes through them. So DNA might be stored in a fractal ball, but is it conductive? Well, it turns out the answer is maybe.
Well, and it's not just maybe. This is only loosely related, but it is really significant and important. The brain processes a shit ton of information really quickly. In fact, a few months ago, there were entangled biphotons observed to be emitted from neurons. This suggests that consciousness is entangled. That has philosophical and real-world implications that go for miles. But what I'm getting at here is that it's long been suspected that there must be superconductors in the brain that facilitate this ultra-rapid processing of information. The problem is that gold, for example, there's a critical temperature for all superconductors to become superconductors. Otherwise, they don't have that property. It was recently discovered that light can make superconductors active superconductors in the absence of the critical temperature. And so DNA has been proven to emit biophotons at the rate of 100 per second per square centimeter. Plants, all animals. And studies have also shown that the information they're carrying can be understood across species. Right? So in order for the DNA to be an antenna, these superconductors would have to be activated by light, but they would be. And I don't think that was known at the time that this guy made this video.
For over 20 years, scientists have been arguing about whether or not DNA strands are conductive. In one experiment, they took a part of a strand of DNA and they anchored it to a gold surface with a buckyball or some craziness like that, and they had this gold pyramid probe, and they were able to pass a current through it, and they said, yes, DNA is conductive.
In the last few decades, and more like in the last 100 years or so, we've managed to develop quite a lot of different types of antenna, a lot of different types of detectors.
And two things in case you guys missed it. Not only were they using gold, but one of the devices was a pyramid-shaped piece of gold. And there's a reason why it's pyramid-shaped that has to do with the electromagnetic interactions it's doing. Remember what I said about the pyramids and the electromagnetic energy and interfacing with DNA in exactly the way they were doing it in that experiment, that's something.
And a lot of different ways for us to measure different types of frequencies around the universe in order to observe and learn how the universe works and how things around the universe seem to interact with one another. But when it comes to receiving and transmitting various types of frequencies, the idea of using an antenna to measure something that's much smaller on a scale of, let's just say, atoms or molecules hasn't really been explored as much. And that's, of course, until now. It looks like, for the first time ever, the scientists whose paper you can find in the description below managed to create a microantenna.
So, this is a little bit conspiratorial, conspiracy theory-ish, but it's real. You can check into this yourself. They recently discovered, in the same concentrations, fluorescent nanoparticles in Coca-Cola and Pepsi. That's a bit odd, because nanoparticles are everywhere, but there's only one naturally occurring fluorescent nanoparticle, some obscure metal. That means that these particles were introduced deliberately. And I don't want to talk about it right now in depth. The last time I did, they actually gave me a medical misinformation strike, even though I don't really see how Pepsi or Coca-Cola is a medical product, which is also weird. But perhaps I'll make on my Rumble channel a video going into detail about how that relates to these nano antennas. From watching this, you might be able to put two and two together and understand what I'm implying without saying it explicitly.
Actually, an antenna whose purpose is to measure the activity of proteins, and an antenna that seems to be made out of DNA. Here the scientists start by creating a tiny DNA structure that contains some sort of fluorescent molecule that emits a certain type of light that's visible in a very specific frequency. And this DNA molecule then starts physically interacting with one of the proteins that the scientists are trying to study. The thing is, once it starts interacting with the protein physically, it also starts to change the way that it emits the light, which changes all of the emissions coming from this antenna or from the bioluminescent dye. And depending on what the protein is doing and how it's reshaping itself, the antenna starts sending very specific signals, or essentially very specific frequencies of light.
And so I guess the traditional model is that...
So those last two bits I put in there to show how it's not even the DNA. We're going to get into that. So Dave wasn't quite exactly wrong saying that electromagnetic fields can't alter DNA, because that's not what's happening. And what's happening is actually crazier than that. The manipulations that are done through the electromagnetic field of organisms the changes are retained in the progeny without altering the genome. But Dave said there is no field that can be manipulated that will cause complex changes in proteins and amino acids and whatever. That's not true. And it's old news. You know, and not trying to gloat here, but why do I know this stuff? And somebody like Professor Dave, this is his life, science, is completely in the dark.
Somehow cells are sending biochemical signals to each other that allow development to happen, the smart way. But you think there is something else at work? What is that?
Well, cells certainly do communicate biochemically and via physical forces, but there's something else that's going on that's extremely interesting, and that is that it's basically called bioelectricity, non-neural bioelectricity. So it turns out that all cells, not just nerves, but all cells in your body communicate with each other using electrical signals. Okay,
so I have to pause this a lot because last time I tried to do this with my patrons, this is where YouTube stopped the stream. So I'm going to break this part up quite a bit, check in with the chat, and see if there's any questions or comments. Encourage you guys to hit the like button, consider becoming a patron. All nuclear chemistry came from alchemy. I mean, I wouldn't put it exactly that way, but yeah. I mean, chemistry basically came from alchemy.
What you're seeing here is a time-lapse video for the first time.
This is crazy.
We are
guys.
now able to eavesdrop on all of the electrical conversations that the cells are having with each other. So think about this. We're now watching. This is an early frog embryo. This is about 8 hours to 10 hours of development. And the colors are showing you actual electrical states that allows you to see all of the electrical software that's running on the genome-defined cellular hardware. And so these cells are basically communicating with each other who's going to be head, who's going to be tail, who's going to be left and right, and make eyes and brain and so on. And so it is this software that allows these living systems to achieve specific goals.
And by the way, the guy talking, Michael Levin, is absolutely incredible. And on the Theory of Everything podcast a little while back, he was asked, because he believes that we're part of a larger intelligence. You know, he talks about light cones, which are basically, you know, on every level from particle, we have a very fundamental intelligence that guides their functionality, and then collectively it adds up to the chemical level. And then we have chemical intelligence. And then we have, you know, cells, and then larger organisms, and then towns, cities, countries, planets. But theoretically, you should keep extending this light cone. And he was asked if we are indeed part of a larger intelligence, what do you think that would look like? And he said, I think it would look like synchronicity. That's probably our best indicator. And coming from, you know, a Harvard PhD, he's one of the greatest minds of the modern era, without a doubt. You know, to hear somebody like that acknowledging the implications of synchronicity was a massive moment that very few people, I think, you know, relative to the, you know, the mainstream missed it. It's like the old paradigm has already died and we've already moved on. But most of humanity is so hypnotized, they haven't even noticed.
Such as building an embryo or regenerating a limb for animals that do this. And the ability to see these electrical conversations gives us some really remarkable opportunities to target or to rewrite the goals towards which these living systems are operating.
A program that somehow includes all the information needed to tell that organism what its destiny is. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yes, quite. Basically what happens is that these cells, by forming electrical networks, much like networks in the brain, they form electrical networks, and these networks process information, including pattern memories. They include representation of large-scale anatomical structures where various organs will go, what the different axes of the animal, front and back, head and tail, are going to be. And these are literally held in the electrical circuits across large tissues in the same way that that brains hold other kinds of memories and learning. The ability to see these bioelectrical signals is giving us an entry point directly into the software that guides large-scale anatomy, which is a very different approach to medicine than to rewiring specific pathways inside of every cell.
Okay, and let's talk about another level of the implication of that. He's literally saying that memory is being held in an electrical field. Microcosm, macrocosm. That's basically acknowledging something like the Akashic Record, a universal mind. And in other talks, Levin acknowledges that and basically admits that he's a panpsychist.
So this is
but with proof, not as a faith-based belief system, with proof.
This is a creature known as a planarian. They're flatworms. They're actually quite a complex creature. They have a true brain, lots of different organs, and so on. And the amazing thing about these planaria is that they are highly, highly regenerative. So if you cut it into pieces, in fact, over 200 pieces, every piece will rebuild exactly what's needed to make a perfect little worm. So think about that. This is a system where every single piece knows exactly what a correct planarian looks like and builds the right organs in the right places, and then stops.
And note that he said it has a brain. So when they cut it into 200 pieces, only one piece has the brain. And yet it can rebuild itself, grow new eyes, a new brain, because of information stored in a field around the organism.
That's one of the most amazing things about regeneration. So what we discovered is that if you cut it into 3 pieces and amputate the head and the tail, and you just take this middle fragment, which is what you see here. Amazingly, there is an electrical gradient, head to tail, that's generated that tells the piece where the heads and the tails go, and in fact, how many heads or tails you're supposed to have. So what we learned to do is to manipulate this electrical gradient. And the important thing is that we don't apply electricity. What we do instead was we turn on and off the little transistors. They're actually ion channel proteins that every cell natively uses to set up this electrical state. And so now we have ways to turn them on and off. And when you do this, one of the things you can do is you can shift that circuit to a state that says, no, build 2 heads, or in fact, build no heads. And what you're seeing here are real worms that have either 2 or no heads that result from this, because that electrical map is what the cells are using to decide what to do. And so what you're seeing here are live 2-headed worms. And having generated these, we did a completely crazy experiment. You take one of these 2-headed worms and you chop off both heads and you leave just the normal middle fragment. Now keep in mind, these animals have not been genomically edited. There's absolutely nothing different about their genomes. Their genomic sequence is completely wild type. So you amputate the heads, you've got a nice normal fragment. And then you ask in plain water, what is it going to do? And of course, the standard paradigm would say, well, if you've gotten rid of this ectopic extra tissue, the genome is not edited, so it should make a perfectly normal worm.
Hold on, guys. I don't want to get taken down at the climax here. All right. We're good. I have no warnings. Oh, yeah. And of course, this sort of validates the Hermetic axiom, the all is in the all. You know, you cut this worm into 200 pieces and it grows back the whole worm, including having 2 heads if that change had been made in the original organism, without changing the genome.
And the amazing thing is that is not what happens. These worms, when cut again and again in the future, in plain water, they continue to regenerate as 2-headed. Think about this. The pattern memory to which these animals will regenerate after damage has been permanently rewritten. And in fact, we can now write it back and send them back to being 1-headed without any genomic editing. So this right here is telling you that the information structure that tells these worms how many heads they're supposed to have is not directly in the genome. It is in this additional bioelectric layer. Probably many other things are as well. And we now have the ability to rewrite it. And that, of course, is the key definition of memory. It has to be stable, long-term stable, and it has to be rewritable. And we're now beginning to crack this morphogenetic code to ask, how is it that these tissues store a map of what to do, and how we can go in and rewrite that map to new outcomes.
So I think he's going to mention this, but because I have to keep pausing. The issue with all this is that it leads to potential immortality. And so in case you're wondering about the supposed depopulation agenda, if people no longer die, things are getting complicated.
These worms are basically immortal. So these worms, because they are so highly regenerative, they have no age limit. And they're telling us that if we crack the secret of regeneration, which is not only growing new cells, but knowing when to stop. You see, this is absolutely crucial. If you can continue to exert this really profound control over the three-dimensional structures that the cells are working towards, you could defeat aging as well as traumatic injury and things like this. So one thing to keep in mind is that this ability to rewrite the large-scale anatomical structure of the body is not just some weird planarian trick. It's not just something that works in flatworms. So what you're seeing here is a tadpole with an eye and a gut. And what we've done is we've turned on very specific ion channels. So we basically just manipulated these little electrical transistors that are inside of cells. And we've imposed a state on some of these gut cells that's normally associated with building an eye.
I could have sworn I edited all this down. I'm hoping I didn't post the unedited version, because then this will go on for a while. And also there was the perfect song at the end. Yeah, it looks like somehow I did actually manage to post the shit. All right, well.
And as a result, what the cells do is they build an eye. These eyes are complete. They have optic nerve, lens, all the same retina, all the same stuff that an eye is supposed to have. They can see, by the way, out of these eyes. And what you're seeing here is that by triggering eye-building subroutines in the physiological software of the body, you can very, very easily tell it to build a complex organ. Now, this is important for biomedicine because we don't know how to micromanage the construction of an eye, and I think it's going to be a really long time before we can really bottom-up build things like eyes or hands and so on. But we don't need to, because the body already knows how to do it, and there are these subroutines that can be triggered by specific electrical patterns that we can find. And this is what we call cracking the bioelectric code. We can make eyes, we can make extra limbs. Here's one of our 5-legged tadpoles. We can make extra hearts. We're starting to crack the code to understand where are the subroutines in this software that we can trigger and build these complex organs long before we actually know how to micromanage the process at the cellular level.
So as you've started...
So... Bummed that I didn't publish the correct version of this, but stick around because he is about to show Frankenstein's. He has brought clumps of dead skin cells to life. They'll grow legs and go through mazes and shit. It's completely insane and a little bit terrifying.
To get to learn this electrical layer and what it can do, you've been able to create, is it fair to say it's almost like a novel life form called a xenobot? Talk to me about xenobots.
Right. So this, if you think about this, this leads to a really strange prediction. If the cells are really willing to build towards a specific map, we could take genetically unaltered cells. And what you're seeing here is cells taken out of a frog body. They've coalesced in a way that asks them to re-envision their multicellularity. And what you see here is that when liberated from the rest of the body of the animal, they make these tiny little novel bodies that are, in terms of behavior, you can see they can move, they can run a maze. That are completely different from frogs or tadpoles. Frog cells, when asked to re-envision what kind of body they want to make, do something incredibly interesting. They use the hardware that their genetics gives them. For example, these little hairs, these little cilia that are normally used to redistribute mucus on the outside of a frog, those are genetically specified. But what these creatures did, because the cells are able to form novel kinds of bodies, they have figured out how to use these little cilia to instead row against the water.
It's like that's cute, Michael, but you brought dead cells to life. I'm pretty sure this is the first human being that has actually given inanimate matter literal life. And not just alive, but it can do stuff.
And now have locomotion. So not only can they move around, but they can, and here what you're seeing is that these cells are coalescing together. Now they're starting to have conversations about what they are going to do. You can see here the flashes are these exchanges of information. Keep in mind, this is just skin. There is no nervous system. There is no brain. This is just skin. This is skin that has learned to make a new body and to explore its environment and move around. And they have spontaneous behaviors. You can see here where it's swimming down this maze. At this point, it decides to turn around and go back where it came from. So it has its own behavior. And this is...
That clump of skin cells just made a choice.
This is a remarkable model system for several reasons. First of all, it shows us the amazing plasticity of cells that are genetically wild type. There's no genetic editing here. These are cells that are really prone to making some sort of functional body. The second thing, and this was done in collaboration with Josh Bongard's lab at UVM, they modeled the structure of these things and evolved it in a virtual world. So this is literally on a computer. They modeled it on a computer. So this is literally the only organism that I know of on the face of this planet whose evolution took place not in the biosphere of the Earth, but inside a computer. So the individual cells have an evolutionary history, but this organism has never existed before. And it was evolved in this virtual world, and then we went ahead and made it in the lab, and you can see this amazing plasticity. So this is not only for making useful machines. You can imagine now programming these to go out into the environment and collect toxins and clean up, or you can imagine ones made out of human cells that would go through your body and collect cancer cells, or reshape arthritic joints, deliver pro-regenerative compounds, all kinds of things. But not only these useful applications, this is an amazing sandbox for learning to communicate morphogenetic signals to cell collectives. So once we crack this, once we understand how these cells decide what to do, and then we're going to, of course, learn to rewrite that information. The next steps are great improvements in regenerative medicine. Because
now, Michael seems like a very sweet, highly intelligent guy, but he's got to know that he's opening Pandora's box. The potential for innumerable catastrophes. I mean... And you got to ask yourself, too, why isn't this bigger news?
We will then be able to tell cells to build healthy organs. And so this is now a really critical opportunity to learn to communicate with cell groups, not to micromanage them, not to force the hardware, but to communicate and rewrite the goals that these cells are trying to accomplish.
Well, it's mind-boggling stuff. Finally, Mike, give us just one other story about medicine that might be to come as you develop this understanding of how this bioelectric layer works.
Yeah, this is incredibly exciting because if you think about it, most of the problems of biomedicine, so birth defects, degenerative disease, aging, traumatic injury, even cancer, all boil down to one thing. Cells are not building what you would like them to build. And so if we understood how to communicate with these collectives and really rewrite their target morphologies, we would be able to normalize tumors. We would be able to repair birth defects, induce regeneration of limbs and other organs. And these are things we have already done in frog models. And so now the next really exciting step is to take this into mammalian cells, and to really turn this into the next generation of regenerative medicine, where we learn to address all of these biomedical needs by communicating with the cell collectives and rewriting their bioelectric pattern memories.
And you would be able to bring anyone back from the dead. So I think we're reaching the end, and remember, this is only the first half of this.
He said for a nominal service charge I could reach nirvana tonight if I was ready, willing, and able to pay him his regular fee. He would drop all the rest of his pressing affairs and devote his attention to me. But I said,
Look here, brother, who you jiving with that cosmic debris?
now who you jiving with that cosmic debris?
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that, found it enlightening. I don't know that I'm going to stick around to chat. I'm actually in quite a bit of pain tonight because I have a problem with periodontal. Bottom jaw bone is exposed inside. And I'm not chewing coca because I want to be rude and talk with my mouth full online. I'm doing it to numb the pain. I have been for quite some time. I just didn't want to talk about it. So that's what's really up, in case you've been wondering, with me always chewing coca. Maybe I can hang out for a minute if you guys have any questions or comments. Always happy to offer my 2 cents. But, it looks like Michael Levin has a solution for periodontal. Fix anything at this point. So it is crazy, you guys. It is crazy that we have AI making people, what's the word when you're no longer obsolete? AI making people obsolete, and then medical technology so the rich don't have to die. It's wild. So just so you know, my next stream, speaking of crazy shit going on in the world, we are at the cusp of something that represents a huge opportunity. And I think it's probably the biggest opportunity financially in our lifetime, and also probably the last. And it does have to do with crypto and the election. So tomorrow's Halloween. I'm taking the night off. Friday, we'll talk about that. And it's one of those rare situations where I feel certain. It's dependent upon who is installed in office. But if it goes the way I think it will, there's a huge opportunity, and we all need to avail ourselves of it. Can I give a fast recap? Well, the video is still on my channel, and you could watch the replay. Sorry about this whole talking with my mouth full thing, but I don't have a choice, man. It's pretty bad pain otherwise. But okay, quick recap. Let me drink some water and get this crap out of my mouth. Okay, that's a little better. Basically, we've had an influx of charlatan, they're not like gurus, alternative history people, Billy Carson, Terrence Howard, Graham Hancock, and they're taking advantage of the fact that so many people have become distrustful of the mainstream, and rightfully so. So they have a lot of people that are starving for answers, and they're extremely dishonest, and they're doing a lot of damage. They're very insulting and condescending to the ancient cultures that they reference. They even lie and say, for example, that the Inca didn't have metallurgy, when they did, in order to support their theories. They pretend not to have answers about things like why the ancients revered gold in order to promote a dumb theory. So, in watching Professor Dave's debunk, I realized that he's not keeping up on cutting-edge science that's paradigm shifting. So I made this video as a kind of attempt at creating a middle ground, where it's like, yeah, there are mysteries, and you should have an open mind. But you should also think critically, and do research, and you know what I mean? It's a balance between becoming so open-minded that wind is whistling through your ears and being Professor Dave and being so closed-minded that you're not even aware of developments in your own field. How did shamanic culture begin? Jesus. Probably the moment that we came into contact with psychoactive plants. You know, there's not, well, that's not true. There's no proof that the Aborigines used psychoactive plants, but it is likely that there's a blue acacia that they've kept super secret. But overwhelmingly, there's no shamanic tradition that doesn't involve some type of mind-altering plant. You know, and I think people have this kind of attitude that using chemicals to access spiritual states is invalid, but I think that's just a misapprehension of how the universe works. Right? We have filters in our nervous system that bring things down to a manageable level of perception, filtering out most of the light, basically. And so, because our operating system uses chemicals, you know, to trigger things, turn them off and on, activate stuff, we have to deactivate those filters with chemicals. And then we have a broader frequency sweep, you know, in our perceptual apparatus. Let me check in with the other chat too. All modern chemistry. Okay, I already answered that. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes. I have quite a bad lag, so I don't get your questions right away. But I'll give you a few minutes. Otherwise, thank you so much for spending this time with me. Consider becoming a patron. I really put a lot of time into that last video and being demonetized. If you guys don't support me, then I don't get support. That makes me a very sad panda. All right, going once, going twice. All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much for hanging out with me. Please hit the like button. Turn on your bell notifications. They're actually below average for my channel, so that would be helpful. And over the next week, I got some really interesting stuff on deck. The solar storms. I'm going to do some experiments and see. I mean, experiments is more like ceremonies, really. But for example, on the first, when the coronal injection is going to make contact with the Earth, I'm definitely going up into the mountains and drinking San Pedro, extra dose of colloidal gold, and see if I can't interface with solar higher self, or whatever the hell that is. All right, guys. Thank you so much again, and good night.